In the 1980s, the Anthill Kids cult was the most disturbing cult in Canada's history, run by leader Roch Thériault. The man was extremely delusional, believing he was a prophet, and managed to convince dozens of people of his supposed greatness. He imposed bizarre rules on the cult's members and punished them with gruesome torture when he questioned their loyalty. In multiple cases, members died as a result of his torture, and in return, he would desecrate their bodies and even wear their ribs around his neck. However, the unthinkable horrors that went on in the Anthill Kids cult were not always present. It originally started as a peaceful, free-thinking community. Roch had begun the commune after he was kicked out of the Seventh-day Adventist Church for trying to gain leadership of it in 1978. From his time in the church, he had made connections and was able to convince a group of people to leave everything behind to come join his religious movement. They left their homes and families behind and were forbidden from outside contact. He established the cult in Sainte Marie, Quebec in 1977. He gave motivational speeches to the members using his charisma to inspire them. However, Roch had a drinking problem which slowly took him over. As his drinking worsened, his violence and strict rules ramped up. Members of the commune were not allowed to have intercourse without his explicit permission, and weren't even allowed to talk to each other without his presence. He was slowly becoming less of a motivational leader and more of a tyrant. Members began to stray, and Roch suspected that they had doubts about him, so he began spying on them, waiting for them to slip up. He would then confront them about their doubts and tell them God had told him. This would restore their faith in him, allowing the abuse to continue. The harsh, irrational rules were the least of the cult's problems, however. Thériault would inflict punishments on the members for a variety of reasons. If he suspected a member wanted to leave, or if they perhaps didn't bring in enough money, he would pluck out individual hairs from their body, or he would suspend them from the ceiling, hit them with belts and hammers, or even defecate on them. Even this was the most mild of what was to come. Since Thériault was a child, he had feared the end of the world. As his drinking worsened, he became increasingly paranoid. He reported to members of the Anthill Kids that God had told him the world would end in February 1979. In preparation, he moved the cult to a mountainside which he called Eternal Mountain in Quebec. He ordered members to begin building a small town, and as he watched them work, he compared them to ants in an anthill, spawning the name of the cult. February 1979 came and went, and of course, the world had not ended. Roch made the excuse that God had a different sense of time, and that there had been a miscommunication. As he sensed unrest in the cult, he decided he needed something stronger to hold it together. He got married to every female member, of which there were 9, and began impregnating them. Throughout the 1980s, he would father over 20 children, growing the cult exponentially to nearly 40 members. One of the boys in the commune, 2-year-old Samuel, complained he had trouble urinating in 1981. Thériault, who had appointed himself as the surgeon and healer, performed an operation on the boy. An operation which consisted of slicing open his penis. The boy was constantly crying after the procedure, so Roch ordered another male member, Guy Veer, to beat the boy. The beating was so harsh that the boy later died from his injuries. Roch had not intended the boy's death, and as punishment, he castrated Veer. They then burned the boy's body in an attempt to conceal his death. In 1984, the cult relocated from Eternal Mountain to a small village in central Ontario. The tyrant, Thériault, had no intentions of slowing down the abuse, and his unthinkable punishments increased in severity. He would not only inflict horrible punishments on them, but he would also force them to do it to each other. He'd have them cut off each other's toes, shoot each other in the shoulders with shotguns, or even force them to break their own legs with a sledgehammer. He would also make them sit on lit stoves, eat dead mice and feces, and much more. It didn't matter what age or sex you were, every member received horrid punishments. Thériault would sexually abuse the children, or suspend them over fires, or would even nail them to trees. He would then force other children to throw rocks at the helpless kids. One mother, Gabrielle Lavallée, knew her child would not be spared from the cruel conditions of the commune. So she took her newborn baby and left it outside in freezing conditions so that it would not have to bear the torture. The child died, and the death led to child services taking 17 children from the commune. Thériault received no punishment, and the abuse carried on among the adults. The amateur and crude surgeries continued. Thériault would inject ethanol into members' stomachs when they complained of stomach pain. He also performed circumcisions on the males in the cult, regardless of their age. The most disturbing example of the Anthill Kids' horrors took place in 1989. A member named Solange Boyard complained about an upset stomach. Thériault took extreme action, forcing her to strip off her clothes and lay on a table. Then he forced a tube into her rectum and filled it with molasses and olive oil. He then took out a knife and cut open her abdomen, ripping out sections of her intestines with his bare hands. Keep in mind, she was fully conscious during this whole operation, with no numbing or anesthetic. She was then stitched up by another member of the cult. Finally, he had other women force a tube down her throat and blow into it. The bizarre surgery was over, but Boyard died from her injuries the next day. But Thériault wasn't done with her yet. He had claimed to have the power of resurrection and attempted to use his gift. He had other members saw off the top of her skull, exposing her brain. He then ejaculated onto it, claiming it would bring her back to life. Of course, it did not. He then took out one of her ribs to wear around his neck and buried her desecrated corpse. The worst horrors of the cult were nearing an end, but there is one more notable event that happened before its demise. Gabrielle Lavallée received treatment from Thériault, which included burns to her genitals from a welding torch, a needle breaking off in her back, and 8 teeth pulled after complaints of a toothache. He cut off part of her breast and hit her in the head with the back of an axe. After the intense torture, she attempted to escape, but was unsuccessful. She returned to the commune, where Thériault was enraged. He cut off one of her fingers and stabbed through her hand into a table, pinning her arm. He then grabbed a cleaver and forcibly amputated her arm. It wasn't long before Lavallée attempted another escape, and this time she was successful. She contacted police, who came and arrested Thériault. Initially, he was only charged with assault and was sentenced to 12 years in prison. With the head of the cult now gone, it fell apart without him, though Roch managed to father 4 more children with the remaining women in the cult during conjugal visits in prison. As he was in prison for the assault, the investigation of the Anthill Kids was still ongoing. Upon discovery of Solange Boyard's body, he was charged and pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. His sentence was changed to life in prison. Roch Thériault died on February 26, 2001, at age 63 after being stabbed to death by his cellmate. Fortunately, the monster who ran the most disturbing cult in Canada's history will never have the chance to harm anyone again.